Greater Southwest International Airport was supposed to be billed as the next regional airport for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Having one airport in the area would save money for both cities as well as for the United States' Civil Aeronautics Board. After only operating for 20 years, this airport was bulldozed and made the way for the current Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. What's going on, everybody? My name's Cool Titanium68, and in today's aviation video, we're actually going to be talking about the rise and fall of Greater Southwest International Airport. Now, plans to build a regional airport for the DFW area had been ongoing since as early as 1920. Officials in Fort Worth were the first to discuss plans for a quote-unquote regional airport that could serve both the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth. Because suburban cities like Arlington, Grand Prairie, and Irving, among others, were nowhere near close to being as built as where they are now, if some of them didn't even really exist at all, there was plenty of land in between the two cities to build a new airport. However, the city of Dallas initially rebuffed the invitation as they were already working on building paved runways for their own municipal airport, Dallas Love Field. In 1930, the city of Fort Worth brought the idea back on the table, and this time Dallas was willing to listen. With the Great Depression hitting both cities especially hard, the idea of a shared terminal would bring less of a financial burden to both cities. After preliminary talks, both cities found a site along the Dallas-Tarrant County line that was almost equidistant to both cities. This airport was to sit within the city limits of Fort Worth, but funding and taxing revenue would be split between both cities. By the mid-30s, earthworkers were already crawling all over the site located on the southeast side of what is now State Highway 183 and the State Highway 360 interchange, and both cities were in the process of securing a grant from the Workers' Progress Administration for the construction of a new terminal building. However, after the city of Dallas found out that the terminal building was built on the west side of the terminal, about a mile closer to Fort Worth, they decided to withdraw its name from the project and use the WPA money to build a new terminal at Love Field, refusing to discuss the proposal any further. Now, initially, when this airport opened, it was labeled as Midway. It sat relatively abandoned for a few years, but with World War II in full swing, Fort Worth had to stop construction of the terminal. However, through World War II, other construction was carried on under the CAA National Defense Airport Development Program, where this airfield was operated during World War II by the military as training field and test flights, just like Love Field. Now, we'll talk about that in next week's video when we talk about Love Field, but both airports were used as training facilities, and pretty much with it being a half-finished airport at this point, the military would improve the airport just enough to accommodate the aircraft that were being worked on. What were they being used? I don't honestly know. Now, in some of the aeronautical charts, this airport, which was now named Arlington Municipal Airport, this is not to be confused with Arlington National, which is currently, and I can show y'all on the map. This Arlington Municipal was not to be confused with what is today Arlington Municipal Airport, because Arlington Municipal Airport today is located off of Collins Street south of I-20. What we're talking about is this area right over here, and you can kind of see that there's still a lingering mark. You can't really see it that much if I were to move to like Google Earth and show y'all. So like, let's say I open up Google Earth. If I were to do that, I might try and look at it later as we get there, once we talk more about like after it's shut down. But this sat on a 640-acre property with about 3 4,100-foot paved runways and then a 4,500-foot east to west sod runway. At that point, it was owned by the city of Arlington and was operated for private interests. Now, after World War II, again, Fort Worth was left with a half-built airport. It consisted of a few half-paved runways, a couple wooden hangars, but no passenger facilities. At that same time, Meacham International was showing signs of strain as 3 sides of the airport had development built close to the airport. You can kind of see what it's like even today. This is what Fort Worth Meacham looks like right now. I mean, the east side is pretty much strangled by US 287. You've got housing to the south, and then you have another concrete mixing facility just to its west. So there's really not much there. And they can't really go to the north, because this is kind of like a soil recharge reservoir right on the north side. Like, this is still probably good like several hundred feet farther down from where the runways are currently. They decided to take a look at Midway and asked Dallas if they wanted to build a new regional airport, again, which Dallas refused. In 1946, Fort Worth hired a firm to prepare an airport plan for the city, and the following year they decided to develop Midway as its major airport. They started construction of the new airport in hopes that the Civil Aeronautics Board and the FAA would force Dallas to come aboard and work on them in the construction of Midway, which at that point had been renamed to Greater Fort Worth International Airport. In 1948, the CAA National Airport Plan recommended that the airport be expanded to a major regional airport. Fort Worth then annexed a site into the city of Fort Worth and continued to develop the airport along with the support of American Airlines, again, still with the opposition of Dallas. The feud between Dallas and Fort Worth actually got so bitter that the mayor at the time, Amon Carter, would refuse to eat in Dallas restaurants. Now, he would still go to the city of Dallas for work, but anytime they would have to have lunch there, he'd bring his own food. He would not use any sort of business in the city of Dallas. He would not support any of those businesses because he was that bitter with them. Moving on. Through the early 50s, construction would continue on the airport, and at that point it was renamed to Amon Carter Field. So it was renamed, its basically name was Greater Fort Worth International Airport at Amon Carter Field. And this was renamed from Fort Worth Mayor Amon Carter. When the airport initially opened on April 25th, 1953, again, Greater Fort Worth International Airport at Amon Carter Field. Yeah, that is a mouthful. It had two 6,500-foot runways and had the foundation set for a third northeast-southwest runway. On top of this, there would be two large maintenance hangars that opened with the airport. One for American Airlines on the, I believe that is the north side, and Central Airlines had one on the southwest side. The latter of which would merge with Ozark Airlines, which would then merge with TWA, and ultimately American Airlines would merge TWA would merge with American Airlines in 2001. Now, the terminal itself, again, was built on the west side and the same location that made Dallas pull out of the project in 1942. Now, if I can try and load this in, because I know, at least in the 2000s, this area down here where Greater Southwest was located was not built up. So if I would have moved to 2001, you could kind of see the outlines of where everything was. The terminal building was right here, and this was one of the runways. Probably even go to 1995, which has actually not that great of a picture of it either. I mean, you've got some of the stuff that's been torn out, but as you can see, in 2001, this was built, and this had become industrial, and we'll talk more about it, and I'll show y'all again as we get to that area. But it was built on that west side. So the terminal itself was a four-level structure topped with the air traffic control tower, and this is kind of some of the stuff that it looks like when it opened up. This was the air traffic control tower. You have 1, 2, 3, and there's probably a fourth somewhere, but that's what it had looked like. And this was pretty much it when it was done. So as you could see, this is the 4-level thing. You had a little bit of a lobby out and around here. I believe, I don't remember exactly which side had the stuff. But yeah, so there was a it was a 2-level wing. So there was a 2-level wing on either side with a concourse that would extend outward across the apron. Now, these are the two aprons. Now, this northern wing would actually be where all of the ticketing and the would be where the ticketing and then some of the check-in stuff would be, and then the south would be the arrivals, would be stuff for the arrivals as well as the baggage claim. The north side actually was exclusively used for American Airlines, and then the south concourse here was actually used for everybody else. So between the two wings would actually be a huge 2-story lobby with all sorts of plush furniture. I mean, this is what it looks like. And then it has this really nice 18-karat gold mural. So again, it looks like it's pretty plush. It was 2 stories because, I mean, look, they got one and it's a pretty high ceiling. I've honestly never been because, again, I am way too young to know about this stuff. I'm way too young to have been here. But again, the airport opened with 5 airlines: American, Braniff, Central, Trans-Texas, and Pioneer. As I said before, American would operate out of the 10-gate northern concourse, and the other 4 airlines would operate out of the southern concourse. Now, throughout the first 5 years, actually, the airport was doing decently well. State Highway 183 on the north, had been expanded to 4 lanes at this point, making it easier to access the airport, especially since the Dallas-Fort Worth Turnpike would not open until 1957, which is far south. Love Field had been operating out of a 1940 vintage terminal and was at that point struggling to handle the traffic despite recent additions. Greater Fort Worth, on the other hand, was relatively congestion-free, and by 1954, that third runway, southeast and northwest runway, had been built. Now, a year later, after its opening, Pioneer Airlines had merged with LA-based Continental Airlines and had assumed all of Pioneer's flights out of Amon Carter Field. Everything was doing well for Greater Fort Worth International until 1958, when Love Field would open their Lemon Avenue terminal, known as the quote-unquote jet age terminal. Almost immediately, Greater Fort Worth's share of passengers in Dallas vanished. And through the 50s, there were 2 attempts made by the city of Fort Worth to turn Amon Carter Field into a joint regional airport, with Dallas hopefully participating as a full partner. But of course, Dallas would refuse and would keep expanding Love Field. Now, through the latter half of the 50s, again, the airport was doing okay. In 1958, the first Boeing 707 landed at Amon Carter with service from Fort Worth to LA starting on December 20th, 1959. Earlier in 59, Central Airlines would build that hangar on the southwest side of the airport. And even though Braniff, which was DFW's dominant carrier in the area, would still keep a token presence at Amon Carter Field, whereas American would keep a much busier schedule. And actually, American, as we go through, you can kind of see that American pretty much propped up that airport. Now, at the start of the new decade, the city of Fort Worth would actually purchase Amon Carter Field outright in an effort to better compete with Amon Carter Field. A year later, 2 airlines would add services to Amon Carter Field. Delta Airlines, which also served the Dallas area, which has served the Dallas area for decades and still serves the Dallas area to this day at both DFW International and Love Field, received authority to serve California from the airport, and then another airport called Eastern Airlines. They were granted a Fort Worth to Love Field to New Orleans to Tampa to Miami route. However, passenger numbers were declining as more and more passengers were deciding to favor Love Field over Amon Carter. Now, in 1962, Fort Worth actually abandoned their strategy of competing with Dallas and was determined to prove the airport offered unlimited expansion outside, compared to Love Field. In the only expansion plan in its history, what they did is they extended runway 1331 by 2,000 feet. So let me try and find one of the pictures here for that. Got it. So what they did is they would extend this runway by 2,000 feet, if I remember. I don't remember if I have the right picture for that. Yeah, so what they did is they would extend runway 1331. So that is this northwest to southeast runway here by 2,000 feet to the south. And then on another ambitious project, they actually extended runway 1734. I think that's what it is. It's 1735 was extended to the north. That required State Highway 183 to be tunneled. Now, the terminal building itself was actually left alone because, again, it was operating well under capacity. In that same year, both Delta and Braniff still had leases at the airport, at least to build any facility, but they still never did. The only 2 that did build something was American and eventually Continental, which would assume that. As you can see, this was Central Airlines' hangar down here. And again, they had American and then another hangar up here. But as you can see, there's almost nothing around here. And I believe this would become the future State Highway 360 right here as time would go on. But I digress. In an effort to try to persuade the people to fly out of Fort Worth, they decided to rename the airport to Greater Southwest International Airport - Amon Carter Field, with the 3-letter designator for the FAA becoming GSW. At this time, however, Dallas was about to unveil its second parallel runway at Love Field, effectively doubling its capacity. Now, at this time, the airport had only 2 runways, and I think they had shut down that third runway at that same time. This runway here was shut down. So the only 2 that they had was runway 1331 and 1735. Now, runway 1331 was 8,400 feet, and then runway 1735 was now 6,400 feet. And there were 6 airlines flying out. You had American, Central, Continental, Delta, Eastern, and Trans-Texas Airlines. Though Dallas and Fort Worth were arch rivals, the FAA chief at the time, Najib Halabi, vowed that his agency would not quote unquote put another nickel into either one of the city's duplicate airports. In 1964, the Civil Aeronautics Board ordered both Dallas and Fort Worth to come up with a new location of a regional airport within 180 days, or the federal government would do it for them. Both cities appointed committees, and by 1965, plans were set for a Dallas-Fort Worth board. The site for the airport, then named Dallas-Fort Worth Regional Airport, was chosen about a mile northeast of the Greater Southwest International Airport, and that is where DFW Airport is today. This is where DFW Airport would become, and as you can probably see, I can probably have a better picture. No, there's no good picture in 95. Ooh, that sucks. Okay, there's no good picture on Google Earth of DFW Airport. But as we continue on, we're pretty much almost done with Greater Southwest at this point. Now, 1965, the percentage of in-plane passengers from Greater Southwest had declined to less than 1% of all Texas airline traffic, while Love Field had increased from 40% to 49%, leading to the virtual abandonment of Greater Southwest and serious congestion at Love Field. By 1967, almost every long-haul route was axed at Greater Southwest, which led to a few tag services out of the airport, as well as American's lone daily flight to Los Angeles. Already, most flights had required a stopover at Love Field, which basically defeated the purpose of using Greater Southwest altogether. Hometown carrier Central Airlines had been absorbed into Denver-based Frontier Airlines. Again, this now explains why Frontier has a big presence at DFW Airport, but almost all service at Greater Southwest from Frontier was suspended immediately, as well as the shuttering of Central's GSW hangar and that headquarters building. Now, in 1968, ground broke on the new Dallas-Fort Worth Regional Airport, and at this point, the airlines at Greater Southwest petitioned the Civil Aeronautics Board to cease their passenger services there immediately. With construction ongoing on the new airport about a mile to the northeast of GSW, the Civil Aeronautics Board reluctantly granted this request. By the end of 1968, only American was providing service out of Greater Southwest, and would then leave the airport in 1969. With scheduled passenger service gone, Greater Southwest became a reliever airport for Love Field, handling commuter/air taxi traffic, charter flights, and crew training flights. American would still use the hangar for maintenance even after they withdrew their passenger flights, and flight academies and general aviation companies set up shop in the terminal building, occupying the former ticketing and baggage wings. The struggling restaurant and gift shop would somehow still hang on, serving local employees and the occasional charter passenger that would fly out of that airport. With the DFW Regional Airport officially opening with a dedication service on September 20th, 1973, Greater Southwest would eventually close on January 13th, 1974. The same day that DFW Regional Airport opened its doors for passenger service. Now, part of that was because, well, it was literally right next to the airport, so they can't really do that. Now, with flights out of DFW taking off and landing, again, immediately overhead, the FAA ordered Greater Southwest runways to close as a safety precaution. And through most of the 70s, the airport sat abandoned as officials could not figure out what to do with the airports. In 1979, the land at the airport that the airport sat on was sold to a developer who renamed the area Centerpoint and decided to market the area as a new industrial park. Now, again, if we go back to that 2001 paint photo, you guys can kind of see there was a lot of warehouses that have already been built east of Amon Carter Boulevard. And that's pretty much what it would be for a good while. The terminal building was demolished in 1980, and by 1982, all of the former GSW runways, except for a small portion of 1735, was demolished, and that would later become Amon Carter Boulevard. And I think in 1980, okay, so you have a better, actually, they do have a better picture of Amon Carter Boulevard on 95, but in 1985, I mean, it's not a very good picture, but you could kind of see just like they had used this as like a very small port, like a good portion of the building had been used. And you could even still see like the inner apron for the airport was still here. The foundation works for some of these were still in place, at least for what had been Greater Southwest. But everything was kind of, they were really trying to cover this up now, because this was something that within 2 years, more than 20 years, they had built probably an airport that could have stayed but didn't really happen. Now, as more development was built on the east side of Amon Carter Boulevard, The old runway was rebuilt into a 4-lane divided road between State Highway 183 and Trinity Boulevard. Now again, as I'm going to show y'all again, north of State Highway 183, I don't know why I mean, you could honestly ask why it still exists. I don't know. But a 1,600-foot portion of runway 1735 still exists. This is all on DFW airport property. So all of like the markings literally just sit on the taxiway leading up, and nothing's really being used on the 1,600-foot stretch of that runway. Although millions of taxpayer dollars went into building this airport, none of the infrastructure from this airport would ever be used at DFW. Again, everything was completely bulldozed in an attempt to hide any reminders of previous failures to build a regional airport in DFW. Even that elaborate terminal building with that 18-karat mural would be bulldozed and wasn't even being used. The west side of Amon Carter Boulevard would actually sit unused for over 30 years. Nowadays, the west side of Amon Carter Boulevard has a lot more stuff. Like if we were to look at 1995, other than the training facilities for American Airlines, I mean, look, in 1985, this was all abandoned. Nothing was here. I mean, yeah, they were probably still tearing out portions of that, but in 1995, in my word, I don't know why it did this again. 1995, the only thing that was there west of Amon Carter Boulevard was American Airlines flight training facilities, which hadn't been moved over here yet. And even then, in 2001, there was a hotel here. They really hadn't started to build anything. They were kind of starting to, but as the years went on, again, for decades, there hasn't been much here. But now it's pretty much fully built out. Close to the 183-360 interchange, there are still some warehouses, and there's actually one small portion that is still vacant. And I think this is still part of 1731 that has not been done. But nowadays, we've got a bunch of apartments. There's a couple of hotels around here, and then some other retail. But then American kind of moved out of this building and expanded into this area here, which they've had for decades now. With that, I think this is where we're going to end the video here. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video over the rise and fall of Greater Southwest International Airport. This is an airport that, again, is not well known to anyone my age, and I would bet that anybody that's my age, because I'm currently 23, I don't think anybody knows what that airport is. But for anyone that's lived here in like the 50s and 60s, even going into the 70s and 80s, when Dallas and Fort Worth were really starting to expand and really starting to connect each other, they would probably know what Greater Southwest is. But again, if you guys like what you just watched, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe down below. If you don't want to miss any future content, whether it's more aviation content like this or more of our automotive and mountain bike content, make sure you guys hit that bell icon so you guys are notified when these videos drop at 8 a.m., as well as any other live streams that we do. I mean, I'm trying to have those scheduled out so that you'll know, so that you get notifications a half hour before they come out, and then you'll get notifications when the live stream starts. Again, hope you all have a great day and a great weekend. Peace.